Welcome to An Amazing Podcast. This is D and Modi, and we are talking about episode 4 of God of High School. So, what did you think?
I thought this was the best episode so far.
Yes.
What about you?
I really enjoyed the episode. I think this had some of the best writing. I think it was definitely a quote-unquote slow burn episode. And I definitely think okay, so this feels really weird, but if it wasn't for the last scene of this episode, this episode would have been so dull. That last scene took this from a 4 to easily an 8.
I'm laughing because you literally took the words out of my mouth. Actually, I wouldn't say it was a 4. I would say, I guess I'll just give my rating now. I would give the episode like a 9. Mm-hmm. Before that, I was probably gonna give the episode like a 7.5 or something. Yeah. So I wasn't gonna give it a 4.
You know, for me, I think this is more of a 5. Like before the end.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was gonna say like the reasons for that are kind of twofold. So the first reason for that is it was really obvious where this was going to go. Like, we all know this is a follow your heart, blah, blah, blah. Don't marry someone you don't love. Don't marry a person, like, if you're in high school, don't marry a 20-something-year-old sugar daddy just because you want your martial arts school to, like, survive extinction.
By the way, that uncle... Mm-hmm. Like, bro, what are you doing?
Okay, again, I love it when...
If I were her dad, I would be rolling in my grave. Like, I can't believe I entrusted my children to you.
No, like, I'm serious, because, like, I always laugh my butt off in anime. Like, if you could count the number of situations in anime that would never happen if the parents would actually act like freaking parents. Like, well, I'm assuming that, like, Mira's, like... Okay, but, like, if I'm, like, going off of first instinct, I would assume she's 17. But if we're going off, like, anime logic, she's probably, like, 14 or 15. So, like, I was watching, I was like, no, okay, like, be a freaking parent right now. Like, in any normal situation, it would have been like, hell no. What you're gonna do is, you're gonna go after yourself for a good 4 years and then come back and ask me this question again. In fact, there would be no, please, like, call off the marriage. My niece isn't ready. It's like, no, we are going home right this second and you are going on vacation from this.
I think, okay, here's my take on it. I think if we're talking about, there's a couple ways it could go in a way that makes sense. So, like, if we're talking about, like, Western culture, you're totally right. Like, the parents the uncle should be like, no, this is crazy. What are you talking about? Now, if we're talking about Eastern culture, and I'll do a disclaimer, I'm not as educated on Eastern culture. What I would expect, or, like, not what I would expect, but what would not surprise me is if it was a situation where it's like the families are kind of forcing or at least pressuring the marriage, where, like, her uncle is like, you have to marry into this family in order to keep the Moonlight Sword alive, right? And still would be weird, but I would, like, I've seen that kind of thing before. Right. But the thing that's completely just confusing here is that it doesn't fall into either of those categories, because it's a situation where typically in Eastern society, I think, you know, the kid, like, the parents have a lot of say over what the kids do. So if the uncle is like, no, you're not, doesn't want you to marry someone, usually I wouldn't expect the daughter to just go ahead and do it anyway. And, like, the uncle's just like, yeah, whatever. Right. Yeah. So anyway, all that said, yeah, that was weird. The uncle has to work on his skills.
He has to, like, learn how to be a parent, learn how to, like, Imagine how much of this would have like been solved if the uncle had a backbone.
Imagine like how much of this would have been avoided if the uncle could actually use the moonlight sword style.
Which is really weird, seeing how like his brother was like the top tier. You'd think there would be some sort of like like you think he would have been like. See, I'm imagining this being the situation where Mira learned the style from her uncle, and like he was just like sports injury. I can't fight as well as I used to, kind of thing.
Mm. I feel like the way it's being portrayed is that, and it makes sense to me. It works for me. Is that probably her dad is? I'm guessing her dad is probably like the eldest son. Mm-hmm. He inherited it. I mean, both brothers probably inherited it, but like her dad is just good at it and the other brother isn't, mm-hmm. which that happens a lot. And then he just passed it down to her, and he tried to take up the sword when he died, but like he just wasn't good at it. So I feel like that's what it is. And I don't really have a problem with it.
Now, one thing I think is a huge missed opportunity, and I'm not sure if the webcomic addresses this, but it's weird that you don't see Mira making a more of an active effort to promote the martial arts style. Like, imagine if you have a scene where she's like, okay, my uncle can't teach it, so I'm going to teach it. But then you have the whole, like, you could always push, like, the whole sexism thing where it's like, yeah, I'm not going to learn a sword style from a girl. What the hell am I going to use it for? Yeah. Dusting? Like, I feel like
maybe that will like become a thing later on.
Yeah, but the issue is right now is that's her whole motivation, and we never mm-hmm. see her like actively doing like. I feel like if you're trying to like make sure your sword style stays alive, you would be actively mm-hmm. trying to teach it up until this point. But again, you could also argue that if it's a high school student trying to teach it, it wouldn't go as far. But I am a little disappointed that I feel like trying to win the tournament isn't like plan A. It feels like we skipped through plans A through B to get to this point.
I don't think so. I think the way I see it, I can imagine many reasons why her leading a dojo wouldn't work mm-hmm. out. Like you said, like maybe people don't want to learn from a girl. Maybe she's too young. Maybe she doesn't have the time because of school or whatever. Mm-hmm. I think there's many reasons. Maybe you're right that like entering the tournament isn't plan A, mm-hmm. but I could definitely see why it's the best idea to like the quickest way to get it popular.
Right.
You know, you enter a tournament that literally the whole world is watching, which I want to get into, by the way. Mm-hmm. Get into a tournament where literally the whole world is watching and you just show off your style. And I feel like that's the easiest way. Plus, you have to think about like advertising for your, you know, like that's like the best. Like if you want people to join your dojo, back in the day, people would like go around mm-hmm. fighting and killing each other and be like, this is my way of the sword, go join my dojo or whatever. Sure. But like, you know, it's the modern day, so I guess the next best alternative to advertise your style is to enter the God of High School.
Right.
I feel like that also makes sense for me.
Right.
But yeah, I wanted to talk about the very beginning scene where the presenters or whatever are like explaining about how like there's like 7.3 billion people around the world watching the tournament and like it's worldwide. And I think that's another thing that like kind of it's like a little piece in there that kind of shows, because we've been talking about the last three episodes about how whether or not this is going to open up and become something bigger, and like it seems like every episode we see that it opens up a little more and more, right? And now they said something along the lines of like in the Seoul preliminary, which to me that implied that there's preliminaries all around the world.
Right.
And that makes me very excited, because that means that there's going to be like a super tournament from people all around the world. Like maybe after the Seoul preliminary, there's like a Asia preliminary, and then like then maybe a worldwide preliminary or something like that, right?
So I am not a big fan of that, and that's mostly because I've always I never liked anime. Liked it when anime draw their entire plot around one single story, like stuff like say D Gray Man, or even like I'm trying to think of a good example of it. It's just like when I feel like a plot moves way slower when it's just centralized on one single thing. I feel like when you're doing, I feel like you can't. It gets stale a lot faster when you try to like focus it on, when you only have like it. You have it kind of. It has the feeling of the entire show is just one arc with mini arcs sort of interspersed around it. I'm hoping that the whole God of High School tournament is like, okay, now we qualify for the. I hope the whole God of High School thing is just like arc 1 and it isn't like what the whole show is dedicated to.
Oh, okay. Yeah, okay. For one, I don't really have a problem with that, like when everything is one arc. But I do think you're probably right that, I mean, you're just saying you hope that's going to be the case, but I think that probably is going to be the case where the God of High School is just going to be one thing, because you're right. If it ends up being like, if the whole series is just one single tournament, I feel like that would get old pretty quickly.
Let me ask you a question.
But also, do you
how do you think this premise would fare if it was a 50 episode series versus a 300 episode series?
Definitely better as a 50 episode series, but also I'm very doubtful. Like, if you asked me to put money on it, I would bet money that the whole series isn't actually going to be about a single tournament. Yeah. But also, what I was going to say was, even with that, don't you think that, let's say if it was one tournament, do you think that adding all these other factors like that, that group that wants to take over the Moonlight Sword and then like all, the stands and all that, there's clearly more lore to it outside of the tournament.
Yes.
Do you think that is enough to make it interesting, even if, like, assuming the whole series is just one tournament?
Well, let me say this. If you told me that this was a 50 episode series and it was just centered around this whole tournament, I would be ridiculously hyped for it. But what we have right now, I feel like 50 episodes is what it is, like literally the most it could ever hope for me to be constantly hyped for this one tournament arc. I will also say, and like, I think the weakest part originally I was saying like, oh man, it's playing the sea. There's all this weird stuff going on in the background. This is really awesome. But I feel like for this episode, with this episode in particular, it's kind of souring for me. Because it feels a little too backgroundish. And like the two spots where I feel like that's an issue is A, they brought back the whole stand concept. And I think that just summoning okay, a person summons a giant monster. That's such a huge, impactful, like, what the hell is going on? This is like, what? This is so hype. If you do, like, you get that effect if you do it once. But if you do it 2 episodes in a row, it kind of diminishes it. And it really sort of puts a damper on how, like, epic all this kung fu stuff is. Because, like, okay, if you can just summon a giant monster, what's the point of all of the crazy kung fu antics? The other thing I feel that this episode sort of stumbles in is the whole get the sword and then get the person who can wield it. I think him just taking the sword as like a last minute gag thing, I think that is such a really strong misstep. This should have like if they were going to go with her losing the sword, I think that should have happened later along the line, and it should have been a much more dramatic moment. That if they were going to go the whole route of him getting the sword, that should have been like an after credit duh 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 moment. Where instead in this, it felt like a tee hee gag, yo, like lol kind of thing.
Yeah. So for the stand thing first, I think I don't have a problem with it being shown 2 episodes in a row.
Mm.
For me, it didn't diminish the impact of it.
Mm.
But the thing that diminished the impact was the fact that the stand was pretty much useless. Yeah. Like he summoned that thing and like it like broke the ceiling or whatever, but like she literally one-shot him with her fists.
Yeah.
Like he like, and the stand didn't do anything. He just like it was like the most useless thing. I feel like it's a good idea to introduce it again in this episode because it gives you more insight into the lore, like about, because now we have 2 people who used it, 2 people who seemingly are not part of the same group. Like this guy is seemingly has nothing to do with the God of High School tournament, and yet they both use that stand thing. But like it was actually so ineffective that it was kind of pointless. And then for the sword thing, yeah, I pretty much agree with you. It would have been better if, I think this whole episode was kind of, I mean, you could argue anything in a story is a plot device, but this episode was like the whole marriage thing. It was a plot device for him to get the sword, I guess. But like you said, it would have been more interesting if instead of even like him getting the sword in the after credits, they should have just not done this whole thing, and they should have just made like a little arc out of her like her sword is lost, right? So like it's the morning of the match, she has to go fight Dai Wei, but she can't find her sword, and now she's like searching for her sword, and like you make an episode out of that, and like maybe even Dai Wei helps her get her sword back or something like that. I don't know, that would have been interesting. Or maybe she doesn't get the sword back. Yeah, but I definitely agree with you that the way him like just they kind of turned it into a gag at the end, I don't think that was a good idea. But also it may also want to be one of those things that like in retrospect, like, you know, a lot of times when you watch something and you don't know what's going to come next, something might not make sense, but then later on you're like, oh, okay, that's why it was done that way, you know.
And honestly, like, you know, I'm just kind of realized a really huge issue I have with all of like the background stuff, and that issue is it is straight up background stuff. Like, if you just edit out every single inch of those scenes, it would not impact the current plot whatsoever.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was attempting to get at, which is that the main thing that we got out of this episode is that we learned about a new character, Song Jin, who like wants to. We basically learned that the Moonlight sword style is not just some thing that she has, and it's like it has importance to the overall plot of the story. That's the main thing that we got out of this, and there's many ways that information could have been given to us, and I don't think the wedding thing was like the best way. And in fact, it's funny because at the beginning of the episode, when they were walking together and like at the end of the day, and they were all like, oh yeah, we have our matches tomorrow. I was just thinking to myself, I was literally thinking to myself, wow, like if this was some other anime, Mira probably wouldn't have made it to this round. She probably would have been eliminated in round 1.
Yeah. Like,
but then just as I said that, the whole marriage thing happens. It's like, of course, you know, it's always, you know, and I don't know, like, it just kind of gets old when like, whenever, like, something has to happen, like, whenever something has to happen in the plot that has to do with, women or any girls or anything like that. And like a lot of the stuff that motivates them a lot of the time has to do, especially in shonen, has to do with romance.
Right.
You know, their motivations a lot of the time always have to do with like romance. Even though in this, it's not like she liked him or anything, but it still had to do with that kind of situation where it could have been anything else. Like I said, like she could have just lost the sword. Like that guy could have stole it, you know?
Because like the problem is, like I said before, we all know she isn't going to marry him. Like,
yeah,
that it's such an obvious plot point that this episode just doesn't create that much intrigue. And
although
I will say, like, again, like the biggest issue with this is this entire plot would only existed to sort of give more weight to the ending scene. And the issue with it is, right now, it worked in the sense that the ending scene really stuck with me, but it failed because I'm probably going to forget this entire sequence within a day.
And also, I also want to add about the whole marriage thing that I actually, if I really think about it, I don't think it's like that bad of an idea. Like, it actually makes sense. Like, if you're thinking about what a character would do, a smart character would do, and like if his goal is to get this sword and she is like he needs the sword and he needs the wielder or whatever, it probably is easier to do it by coercion rather than by force.
Right.
So like the whole marriage thing might actually make sense, but I just think it was done too rapidly, and it wasn't like, you know, it, like you said, like you knew by the way it was playing out, you knew what was going to happen. Like she agreed too quickly. You know, if they had kind of made like an arc out of it, maybe it would have been better. Although I don't know if that would have like derailed the series or not.
Like the other bad part about it is her, like, we established that this sword is something super important to her. Having it be like she just loses it like that.
Yeah.
It really,
and she writes it off.
Yeah, it diminishes it so much.
Like, I think I don't have a problem with her writing it off, actually. Like, but I feel like there should be some sort of like character arc to get to the point where she writes it off. Like, she just like, I think she probably has the right idea, definitely. But I feel like there should have been more build up to it rather than her just being like, yeah, it's fine because, you know, my sword is in my soul,
right,
or whatever. There was another thing I wanted to talk about, which is just a small thing. The art style and the animation in the flashback scene where her uncle was doing the kendo practice, I really liked that. Like, it was very interesting. It kind of reminded me of like the Avatar 1 flashback in Avatar. A little bit. Yeah, I just wanted to mention that.
And this is just like the last thing I wanted to like throw out there. Is like, does it ever like and this is probably because I've just got like I'm on the 4th episode, but all of the characters literally look like they're having the worst allergy season ever.
Yeah, with the nose. Yeah. That's so true.
It looks like they're just like, they look like they should be sounding congested as all hell, and they look like they're using like the wrong Kleenex brand every minute of every single day.
Oh, that reminds me. There are a couple other funny things that I noticed in the episode. One is at the funeral for her dad, like the people who were talking about her dad, they were like, that's what he gets. And I was like, wait, what? That's what they specifically said that's what he gets for having that sword style. And I was like, what? What the hell?
But yeah, so I hate to say this, but I'm running a little bit low on time, but any final thoughts?
Oh, okay. No, that's pretty much all I have to say. The plot twist at the end, great.
Yes.
With him beating the crap out of her. Yeah.
Excellently executed. But yep. So I know it's a little bit on the quick side, but those were our first impressions of God of High School, episode 4. Tune in next time.